Well, good evening to everyone. Thank you. How are you? Well, you sound as if you are. I am sure. I, I'm here to welcome you on behalf of the college, but also the English department of the college, as well as the Hendrix Murphy Foundation programs in literature and language. We're glad you're here. It's a special evening for us. It's an evening with the Murphy visiting poet, our MVP, and this year for 2015-16, that person is Professor Kevin Young. He is. Now I have to read all of this so that as I tell the students I can be true to it, because obviously I wouldn't get it all right. But he comes to us as the Atticus Haygood Professor of English and Creative Writing at Emory University. And I want to take this opportunity to also welcome him again and to thank him, because he has, since he's been here and tomorrow also, he has given so very generously of his time and his talent to our students, to our faculty, and this evening to our larger community, because the Murphy programs embrace the community also. And so, Professor Young, we thank you, and we're glad you chose to come. Now, he is a person about whom I should tell you quite a bit, but I'm going to tell you just a little, okay? Because you can read about him just about everywhere. His reputation is wide and it is well earned. But I'll tell you a few things that I did not see in any of the publicity. He is a student who went to Harvard University, where he studied with a favorite poet and a person that we have had as a guest twice, and that was Seamus Haney. He left Harvard and went to Stanford, and he left Stanford and went to Brown University, where he received his MFA. Now, while he was at Harvard, he became a member of the Dark Room Collective. It was a community of African American writers, and from that, we see in his poetry his interest in the African American community, its past, its present, and its history. Beyond that, his credentials clearly are stellar, and that accounts for the fact that he is our MVP. We'll tell you just a few things about him. In addition to that, obviously, he's widely regarded, and if you look at the jackets of any of his books, they're just full of commentary about the quality of his poems, the nature of what he writes, and all of that. But I'll tell you exactly what I have written on this sheet of paper. He has written 11 books of poetry, and that's prolific for someone so young. Most recently, it says here that he wrote Blue Laws, Selected and Uncollected Poems, 1995, 2015, which was published in 2016. He has also penned Book of Hours, which is a favorite of mine, came out in 2014, and it was a finalist for the Kingsley Tough Poetry Award. In addition, he was a finalist for both the National Book Award and the Los Angeles Times Book Award for poetry. And there are about 2 other paragraphs here. So when you get a chance, read your program, okay? And you will know. Now, as I thought about this, because I don't often get to introduce anybody, and so as I thought about it, I said, when did we decide that we would have a Murphy VP? And so I asked Dr. Rosemary Hindenburg, who is the founding director of the Murphy programs. And she said to me that the first poet came in 1978, and that was Denise Levertov. And she was followed, and I can remember that a little bit, by Maya Angelou. Now, I was not here in 1978. I just want to be sure we clarify that. But Levertov was our inaugural poet. And I will say this about the MVP. Dr. Hindenburg said that when she was trying to think of what we could do to distinguish ourselves as a true liberal arts college, she said, what kind of liberal arts college would not recognize poetry every year? And she said, let's have a title like MVP, because people know most valuable person, okay? And that still could be Murphy Visiting Poet. And that's why we have this particular feature. And it is, in checking with Miss Henrietta Vanneman, the MVP is the longest running of the Murphy programs. And so we're very pleased to be able to sustain it. And now to the poetry. As I thought about Mr. Young's visit, I thought about my very good friend, Alexander Pope. And as I read Mr. Young's poetry, one of Pope's couplets came to mind. And it's the one where he says, "True art is nature to advantage dressed, what oft was thought, but ne'er so well expressed." And as I read from the Book of Hours, I looked in there, and one of the poems was bereavement. And it contained lines about Mr. Young's father's dogs. And as I read those, being a person who comes from the country myself, I thought, these are real dogs. They're not poetry dogs. They're not poeticized dogs, but they do what dogs do. They're for real. And when I got to that line that told us about brothers in Paul, I thought I will never forget that. So what am I saying? I'm saying that for me, his poetry is the real deal. It is that thing that we could often think, but I would not be able to turn into poetry quite the way that he does. It is a comfortable poetry. It's a real poetry. And I think as you listen to him tonight, you will know that. So as I close, Dr. Hindenburg said that year, Ms. Leventoff said the following, that you must have gold in the Fort Knox of your metaphors. So I am saying that as you listen to him tonight, he has gold in the Fort Knox of his metaphors. Please join me in welcoming our guest, Professor Kevin Young. Glad you're here.
Thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. And what a kind welcome. Thank you so much, Alice. And thank you to the Murphy visit. I'm getting an MVP and Murphy confused. So I really appreciate it. Thanks to Hope for seeing me around and making me feel welcome. And it's been a real treat being here. Perhaps you knew when you were mentioning Levertov that she was actually my old teacher. I was in her last class at Stanford before she retired. So it's a real honor to be in the series, truly. I'm going to read for a little bit and then take some questions and then read one last poem. And I thought I'd start with another teacher of mine who's actually from Arkansas. That's C.D. Wright, the late, great C.D. Wright. So this is her poem called as in regarding happiness in pursuit thereof. It is 2005, just before landfall. Here I am, a labyrinth, and I am a mess. I am located at the corner of Waterway and Bluff. I need your help. You will find me to the left of the graveyard, where the trees grow especially talkative at night, where fog and alcohol rub off the edge. We burn to make one another sing, to stay the lake that it not boil, earth not rock. We are running on Aztec time, fifth and final cycle. Eyes switch on, off. We would be mercurochrome to one another, bee balm or chamomile. We should be concrete, glass, and spandex. We should be digital or at least early. Be ivory build, invisible except to the most prepared observer. We will be stardust, ancient tailings of nothing, a lapsed breath. No, we must first be ice, be nails, be teeth, be lightning. That's for CD. So this poem is another poem, I suppose. This is my poem called That Away. It's a poem I wrote for Jacob Lawrence exhibition about the Great Migration. So it's a poem imagining the voice of someone who's decided to go north from the south, which of course African Americans did in great numbers at the turn of the 20th century, really until the 30s and the war. So I don't know if there's anything else you need to know. It mentions the Crescent Limited, which is a train. It still is a route that runs, actually. Anyone know where it goes? It goes from New Orleans, makes a big loop all the way up the coast to New York. That away. And the migrants kept coming, Jacob Lawrence. Was walking and then waiting for a train, the 1240, to take us that away. I got there early. Wasn't a train exactly, but a chariot where the Crescent Limited come to carry me some home I didn't yet know. There were those of us not ready till good Jim swung from a tree, and the white folks crowded the souvenir photos frame. Let his body blacken, the extremities shorn, not shed, but skimmed off, so close it can be shaving, almost. An ear in a pocket, on a shelf, a warning where a book could go. So I got there early. See now, it was morning, a cold snap, first frost, which comes even here and kills the worms out the deer. You can hunt him then, but we never did want after. No trophy crowned down from a wall, watching just a meal, what we might make last till spring. There are ways of keeping a thing. Then there are ways of leaving, and also the one way that we didn't want. I got there early. Luggage less sturdy, cardboard, striped black than my hat. Shoebox of what I shan't say, lunch on my lap. The noise the rails made even before the train. A giant stomach growling, a bowed belly. I did not pray. I got there early. It was not no wish, but a way. So that's a newer poem, but I thought I'd sort of take you on a tour of sorts of some of my older poems, which are all in this book, Blue Laws. The strange thing about doing selected poems, it's strange and good, is that you see your work over time, and this is 20 years of poems. And I thought I'd read you a poem from my very first book, which I wrote much of when I was still in school and some of your ages. This poem is about food. We were talking a lot about chickens at this whole trip, really. I don't know why. Arkansas, I think. But it's in the voice of a woman remembering her childhood in Louisiana, where both my parents are from. And it's likely my mother, so I can't say how old the person is, because she would hurt me if I did reveal that. It's called The Slaughter. It's in 2 short parts. The Slaughter. Everything we ate was on foot. We didn't have the Norge or the Frigidaire, only salt to keep. Autumn's hog went in brine for days, swimming. You had to boil forever just to get the taste out. I loved winter and its chitlins, but boy, I hated cleaning. If not from the hogs, we got fresh buckets full from our slaughterhouse kin. White folks got first pick, even of guts. They loved that stuff, but to us it was only a season just making do. Home, you cut innards in strips, put water in one end, held the other tight, then seesawed them back and forth. Afterwards, we dumped the excess in a hole dug out back. I always make sure folks clean them a second time. Don't eat chitlins at just anyone's filthy old house. Chickens went like dusk. Before twilight, Mama said, "Go get me a hen." And me in that swept yard, swinging one round by the neck, the pop, then dropping it. We rung, but some folks chopped the chicken, flapping a while before it fell, headless, a sight. Feathers we plucked told us that soon cold would come indoors like rains after first frost. Everything then tasted so different and fresh, a sister's back talk, but I wouldn't want back those days for all the known world. No, sir. Some nights, dinner would just get up and run off because I hadn't rung it right. Others, we'd eat roosters tougher and older than we were. Meat so rough, Mama couldn't cut it with her brown eyes. All right, skipping ahead, I thought I'd read some poems from my third book, which is called Jelly Roll, a Blues. And it's very much a book of love poems based in the blues, but really the spirit of the blues, the sound of the country blues especially. I was really interested in capturing those kind of frets and starts that the blues have. And so I thought I'd read a few of those. This one, I think I'll read it. There's a ton of trains in these books, just because I started thinking a lot. I lived by a train, that was part of it. It was sort of my only friend when I first lived there. It's real sad, I know. But also the train has this archetypal meaning, of course, in American culture, but especially African American culture. There's the metaphor of the Underground Railroad, after all, but then there's also the way the train resurfaces and becomes a kind of ticket to freedom, ticket to the north, as in that first poem, That Away, but also the sad thing that carries away the one you love. And this poem is more in that vein. It's called Locomotive Songs. We were hobos every year. It was cheap. A mother each Halloween smudged our cheeks, stuffed us in someone else's clothes. We hopped houses like trains, asking for sweets, much like last night, empty-armed at your door, I begged you. Tonight, the train horn sounds like plenty enough loud to warm even the autumn. The night air with a nip that catches us by surprise. White light, blue light, fog starting to rise. She has me tied a tongue to the tracks. Her new man's elaborate mustache, train coming fast. Can't cry out to save my life. Drats. I've heard tell of a town where the train bound for New Orleans slows just enough, a turn that folks place cars good only for insurance in. The train cashes them, coming round the bend, too late to stop, too slow to derail. That's how I feel, watching you and the station being pulled away. One hand hovering the emergency brake, the other out to wave. This poem's called Errata, as in errors. If you publish a book and there's errors after the fact, they print a little errata slip. But I like to say these are all the things that can go wrong when you try to tell someone you love them. There's quite a few. Errata. Baby, give me just one more hiss. We must lake it fast moreover. I want to hold you in my arms and never get low. I live you so much, it hurts. Baby, jive me gust, one more bliss. Whisper your neat nothings in my near. Can we hawk each other one tour mime? All light wrong. Baby, give me just one more bris. My one and homely, you wake me meek in the needs. Will you Larry me? Baby, hide me just one more guess. With this sing, I'll thee shed. So one thing I decided to do with this book is have poems, outtakes really, that didn't make it into books. So there's a few from Jelly Roll. I thought I'd read one for you. This is called Hurricane Song. There's all these hurricanes tonight and trains, I guess. Hurricane Song. Lady, won't you wait out the hurricane all night at my place? We'll take cover like the lamps and I'll let you oil my scalp. Please, I needs a good woman's hands caught in my hair, turning my knots to butter. All night we'll churn. Dawn will lean in too soon. You'll leave out into the wet world, winded and alone, knowing the me only midnight sees. Last poem I'll read from Jelly Roll is a very, very short poem. I love short poems because what they can do with, in an efficient amount of time. And this is a little story a little girl told me, and to me it's the saddest story in the world. So it's called Early Blues. Once I ordered a pair of shoes, but they never came. That's it. I told you it was sad. So a few books later, I wrote a book called Dear Darkness. And it's a book I've been talking about a little bit the past few days because it was a book of memory, really. A book of blues and sort of odes to various things. And then it changed, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I'll read you a blues or two. This is called Limelight Blues. Limelight Blues. I've been known to wear white shoes beyond Labor Day. I can see through doors and walls made of glass. I'm in an anger encouragement class. When I walk over the water of parking lots, car doors lock. When I wander or enter the elevator, women snap their pocketbooks shut, clutch their handbags close. Plain clothes cops follow me in stores, asking me to holler if I need any help. I can get a rise. Am able to cause patrolmen to look and to stop and second look. Any drugs in the trunk? Civilian teens beg me for green, where to score around here. When I dance, which is often the moon above me wheels its disco lights until there's a fight. Crowds gather and wonder how the spotlight sounds, like a body being born, like the blare of car horns as I cross the street, unlooking, slow. I know, all a movie needs is me shouting at the screen from the balcony. From such heights I watch the darkness gather. What pressure my blood is under. And this is called Something Borrowed Blues. For a while, I was collecting definitions of the blues, and some of my favorites are like the blues are poor man's heart disease, or the blues ain't nothing but a good man feeling bad. And then someone reminded me that the opposite is true. The blues ain't nothing but a bad woman feeling good. Something Borrowed Blues. I finally found me a nice girl to marry. I thought she'd been voted most likely and pretty. Turns out she was voted most pity. Went on down to the courthouse, and the test said we were kin. Not blood, but same proof of liquor stained our veins. We eloped anyway. Her mama's name was Backhand, and her daddy called Jalopy. They couldn't give her away. She had her a voice like an axe and danced like a pickup wrecked beside the road. We spent our honeymoon at home since hell was booked till who knows. So like I said, I was writing these everyday odes to things. Like I have an ode to the Midwest, which I'd read, but I don't want to scare you. So I think I'll skip to these other odes, which are related. Well, maybe. I feel like I'm so close to Kansas where I went to high school that I have to read an ode about it. So this is Ode to the Midwest. It has an epigraph from Bob Dylan. The country I come from is called the Midwest. I want to be doused in cheese and fried. I want to wander the aisles, my heart's supermarket stocked high as cholesterol. I want to die wearing a sweatsuit. I want to live forever in a Christmas sweater, a teddy bear nursing off the front. I want to write a check in the express lane. I want to scrape my driveway clean, myself, early, before anyone's awake. That'll put them to shame. I want to see what the sun sees before it tells the snow to go. I want to be the only black person I know. I want to throw out my back and not complain about it. I want to drive 2 blocks. Why walk? I want love and stuff. I want to cut my sutures myself. I want to jog down to the river and make it my bed. I want to walk its muddy banks and make me a withdrawal. I tried jumping in, found it frozen. I'll go home, I guess, to my rooms where the moon changes and shines like television. So I'd written odes like that, I guess. And then when my father died, I couldn't write for a time. And then I started writing these odes to different things, really to the food of my childhood, what I like to think of as sort of my Grecian urns, if you will. So I'll read just 2 of those and then some poems from Book of Hours. This is called Ode to Pork. Ode to pork. I wouldn't be here without you. Without you, I'd be umpteen pounds lighter and a lot less alive. You stuck round my ribs even when I treated you like a dog, dirty I dare not eat. I know you're the blues because loving you may kill me, but still you rock me down slow as ham hocks on the stove. Any way you come, fried, cued, burnt to within 1 inch of your life, I love. Babe, I revere your every nickname. Took a second. Bacon, chitlin, cracklin, sin. Some call you murder, shame's stepsister, then dress you up and declare you white and healthy. But you always come back sauced to me. Adam himself gave up a rib to see yours piled pink beside him. Your heaven is the only one worth wanting. You keep me all night cursing your 4-letter name, the next begging for you again. So this poem started about food, but really they're about missing my father. So I'll read one that's more obviously about that. This is called Ode to Pepper Vinegar, and I think I saw some in the cafeteria, so maybe I don't have to explain that it's hot, just peppers in vinegar, hence the name. But we had it, in our fridge, and I just thought everyone had that in their fridge. We had a lot of things in our fridge that I assumed everyone had. So, this is Ode to Pepper Vinegar. You sat in the tomb of our family fridge for years without fail. You were all I wanted, covering my greens, satisfaction I've since sought for years in restaurants which claimed soul, but neither knew you nor your vinegar prayer. Baby brother of bitterness, soothsayer, you taught me the difference between loss and holding on. Next to the neon of the maraschino cherries, you floated and stayed, constant as a flame on an unknown soldier's grave. I never did know how you got here, you just were. Adrift in your mason jar, you were a briny bit of where we came from, rusty lid awaiting our touch and tongue. You were faith in the everyday, not rare as the sugarcane my grandparents sent north come Christmas, drained, sweet and dry, delicious, gone by New Year's. No, you were nearer, familiar, the thump of an upright bass or the brass of a funeral band bringing us home. So my book before this was called Book of Hours, as was mentioned. And it's very much a book about, as I was saying to one of the classes yesterday, death and birth and rebirth. So I'll just read a few from that, and then we'll have some questions. Bereavement. Behind his house, my father's dogs sleep in kennels, beautiful. He built just for them. They do not bark. Do they know he is dead? They wag their tails and head. They beg and are fed. Their grief is colossal and forgetful. Each day they wake, seeking his voice, their names. By dusk, they seem to unremember everything. To them, even hunger is a game. For that I envy. For that I cannot bear to watch them pacing their cage. I try to remember they love best confined space to feel safe. Each day a saint comes by to feed the pair, and I draw closer the shades. I've begun to think of them as my father's other sons, as kin, brothers in paw. My eyes each day thaw. One day the water cuts off, then back on. They are outside dogs, which is to say healthy and victorious, purposeful, and one giant muscle, like the heart. Dad taught them not to bark, to point out their prey, to stay. Were they there that day? They call me like witnesses and will not say. I ask for their care and their carelessness. Wish of them forgiveness. I must give them away. I must find for them homes, sleep restless in his all night. I expect they pace as I do, each dog like an eye, roaming with the dead beneath an unlocked lid. After he died, I sort of went around trying to sort of do the last errands that he had. And this is sort of one of them. Charity. So many socks. After the pair the undertaker asked for, I picture them black beneath the fold in your open casket, your toes still cold. What else to do? Body bags of old suits, shirts still pressed, long johns, the unworn, unwashed wreckage of your closet, too many coats to keep, though I will save so many. How can I give away the last of your scent? And still, Father, You have errands, errant dry cleaning to pick up. Yellow tags whose ghostly carbon tells a story where to look. One place closed for good, the tag old. One place with none of your clothes, just stairs as if no one ever dies, as if you are naked somewhere, and I suppose you are. Nothing here. The last place knows exactly what I mean, brings me shirts hanging like a head. Starched collars your beard had worn. One man saying, sorry. Older lady in the back saying how funny you were, how you joked with her weekly. Sorry. And a fellow black man hands your clothes back for free. Don't worry. I've learned death has few kindnesses left. Such is charity so rare and so rarely free that on the way back to your emptying house, I weep. Then drive everything, swaying straight to Goodwill, open late, to live on another body and day. This is called Anniversary. The day will come when you'll be dead longer than alive. Thankfully, not soon. There are, of course, years long before without you breathing, and your ears without me even an idea. Then there are those infant months when I knew your voice, your bearded face, not your name, at least to speak it aloud. And in the night, Father, I cried out, and in the day, like now. So the middle section of the original book of ours, has a slightly different tone. You're probably saying, thank goodness. So I thought I'd read one of those. Expecting. Grave, my wife lies back, hands cross her chest, while the doctor searches early for your heartbeat, peach pit, unripe plum, pulls out the world's worst boombox, a Mr. Microphone, to broadcast your mother's lifting belly. The whoosh and bellows of mama's body, and beneath it, nothing. Beneath the slow stutter of her heart, nothing. The doctor trying again to find you, fragile fern, snowflake, nothing. After, my wife will say in fear, impatient, she went beyond her body, this tiny room, into the ether. For now, we spelunk for you one last time at Lost Canary, miner of coal and chalk, lungs not yet black. I hold my wife's feet to keep her here, and me, trying not to dive starboard to seek you in the dark water. And there it is, faint, an echo, faster and further away than mother's all beatbox and fuzzy feedback. You are like hearing hip-hop for the first time. Power hijacked from a lamppost, all promise. You couldn't sound better, break dancer, my favorite song bumping from a passing car. You've snuck into the club underage and stayed. Only later, much, will your mother begin to believe you're drumming in the distance. Our Kansas City and Congo Square, this jazz band vamping on inside her. So let's have some questions. I can't see, so you will have to answer. I'm gonna have one last poem after this, but. None, am I done? Got off easy? Got someone in the middle here. Hold on, I think they have a mic. I don't know if they... Pass it down. It's like the Donahue show. Phil?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't have volunteered if I'd known there was a mic involved. So I cited you heavily in a John Berryman paper I wrote not too long ago.
Okay,
And you said a lot of great stuff.
thank you.
Well, it's hard to find
Yeah,
good scholarship, you know that. And that was kind of my introduction to you.
Okay.
And one of the things I really loved was you thinking about Berryman in the idiom of the blues,
okay.
devil's music. And I know the blues, obviously, you've read some poems tonight. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about technically how you try to incorporate that legacy or sensibility or sense of anguish, what have you, in your writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sense of anguish. That's an interesting and I think good word, but also it's a sense of humor to me. I think if anything, it's sort of balancing the two. And I think it's almost a tone or an aesthetic rather than strictly speaking a form for me. Though, as I was saying before, and I say in I did a blues poems anthology, that the form of the blues fights the feeling of the blues. And that kind of tension, I think, can be really fruitful for poems as well. There's moments in poems like Bereavement, which I think is a sad poem, I suppose, but has sort of levity or asides or moments that aren't one way. And I think that's because life is not that way. Ralph Ellison said life is jazz-shaped. And I think that's important. And to me, the blues also do that. They mimic the way life is, which is tragic-comic to me. So for the form, I think that repetition does seep through my work. And I see it in Berryman very much. And I have larger sort of thoughts than I could share right here about Berryman and the blues. And I've written a little bit about it and read it as papers, but I haven't published yet about him and the blues, because I think there's more to be said. And I think his mistake is that he kind of conflates the blues and blackface, for instance. And he sees kind of this as a kind of black tradition where, bluesman wasn't exactly not in blackface, And so that kind of distance, I think, is important to maintain when you're approaching Berryman, and sort of his misreading of, say, the blues is just as interesting to me as his sort of love of them. And he undeniably did listen to them a lot.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Over here? Down front?
Can we go back here first?
Sure, wherever. I can't see.
I was going to ask about your musical influences too. I know there's a picture of Robert Johnson and Jelly Roll. I was
Yeah.
just wondering if you channel any specific musicians or listen to their music before you start writing or anything like that.
All of them. All the good ones, I really listen to a wide range of music. Forgive me if I've said this. You've heard me say this. And I guess, I still, until very recently, was buying CDs still, mostly for, the art, or the liner notes, which can be very good. But, I was the guy who'd come up with 5 CDs or 10 CDs, and they'd be like, this is a funny mix, So it's never a one-to-one correlation. I don't have like exact pump-up music or anything. I wish I sort of did, but I really just love all kinds of music, from pop music that isn't worried about whether you like it or not because it knows it's going to convince you to like it sooner or later, to, Prince to hip hop to, and a lot of those influences are in a book like The Gray Album, which is a long book about music from slavery to the present, from the spirituals to hip hop. And I was really trying to trace this tradition of what I call storying, in the way that, say, a Louis Armstrong solo can tell a story, even though it's wordless. And how try to join that to the fact that when I was little and we were in Louisiana, you couldn't say to a grown person, much less even to your cousin, you lie. You'd have to say, you story. And how that sort of, is there a difference there? And how does that work? So I was really trying to understand that as a tradition. And so my grandfather played Zydeco music. This is his fiddle on the cover of the book, which I still have. And I think of poetry as kind of bridging music and the other side of my family, which are many preachers. And so between preaching and music, there's sort of poetry.
Thank you.
Good question. The hardest part's the mic, I think.
This is the first time I've heard of you, but I have a question you might not get asked. You're at Emory University. So are you old enough to remember what this means when a poem is read?
Yes.
Okay. So you understand that with the poetry that you read in this kind of venue, what was the reaction when you read that? Did you even read that type of poetry? Because that's really short for that type of venue. So the question is, you recognize what this is. When you read that, what was the reception? Or did you have another set?
When you say that, which do you mean? You mean anything? Or?
Poem, did you read that particular type of poetry? Or was it more, when I say hip, you with that, not the hip hop, but from that Love Jones generation, which I.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Not
Are you saying, have I ever gotten snaps after reading a poem?
Yeah, snaps, as well as, did you read this type of poetry, or was it a different?
I think different poetry comes from, one reads in different places, I suppose. But I try to change my set every time I read anyway. It's a big book, so I can range around. But I also think, there's poems that make you laugh, and then hopefully they make you think. There's poems you have an initial reaction to, and then there's poems you have a later reaction to. So for me, I've read in all sorts of venues, from bars to here. And I mean, you have to have that flexibility, especially as an African-American poet. And when we were in the Darkroom Collective, it was very much like barnstorming. We'd have to go pile in a car and drive somewhere and show up, and we might do both kinds of readings in one day. Oh no, I lived in San Francisco. I lived in the Mission. So there was a great spot there called Cafe Babar that I used to read at, which wasn't a slam. I'm old enough to be before slams, when people had open mics, which I kind of preferred just because you would get to hear people. Like, there was a guy who would read at Babar who I believe was homeless, and he would stand up and read this incredible, complicated, sophisticated poetry. Not that that was surprising at all. It was just a pleasure to be there and know that any person could come and be a poet. And I think that's important to remember. Poetry lives not in books only, but it lives in our voices and our bodies, and it springs from many different sources. And so that's what I try to encourage. I'm not worried too much about the reaction just to my work. I really want people to hear poems and live poems and experience them however they might. Last question or two?
I just wanted to say I loved the juxtaposition between, as you said, the humor, but then the very much the seriousness in a lot of the poems that you read from Book of Hours. And I was reminded, I guess also in the title, one of my favorite poets, Rilke, named one of his first collections Book of Hours. Yeah. And I was really struck by this sort of this childlike openness to the world in the poems, but then also this very much reflective sadness as well.
In Rilke, you mean, or?
Oh, I mean in your poems,
Okay.
and it reminds me of of that. And I was just wondering what has been some of the biggest challenges when writing poetry for you, or which poems have really been the most difficult to birth? I don't know if that's the right way to word the question, but
All of them.
all of them. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's a big question. I mean, I think there's poems that come easier and poems that come harder, but they often come after the other. Often the easy poems come after a number of difficult poems. And the poet Richard Hugo talks about this phenomenon and says that sometimes when you're starting out, you think, why do I have to write those bad poems or have that difficult time? And, you know, obviously you're building up muscle. So those odes came fairly easy, but I wouldn't say easy. They were poems I couldn't write for a long time, and then suddenly I wrote them. And the bereavement poem, I don't remember writing, you know. It seems like it always was there. I know it wasn't. I remember changing it. But it was sort of a fact, and I had to kind of uncover it. So in a way, every book is really different. You're trying to listen to this inner voice, these ghosts, whether it's your family stories or stories you've made up or stories you've heard. And, you know, elegies especially, I think, are those things that you don't plan to write. No one sits down, I'm going to write an elegy, you know, you just have to. And that poetry of necessity is really important to me. And it's really something that I think helps poetry maintain that urgency that I think it has, but that doesn't mean it can't also be fun and enjoyable and pleasurable. William Carlos Williams says, if it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem. And I think he means, you know, the widest possible definition of pleasure, that, you know, sometimes difficulty can be a pleasure. Sometimes music, wordlessness can be what a poem is after. Is there any last question? Someone down front? Pass the mic this way, yeah. In the crowd is faster.
I was wondering if you could speak to your evolution, like as a poet, especially like looking back on when you first started, and just I'm curious if you look at it as like phases, or like how you approach it differently when you were younger versus now, just as a 20-something. I don't know what's ahead of me, and I'm kind of interested to hear about
Right.
what someone thinks.
I mean, I think I'm supposed to say, well, you should buy the book and you will learn first. I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things, like you almost get as far as that when you're doing a selected poems, but you also kind of have to stop. You can't overanalyze too much. For me, definitely, I think the difference, which is both good and bad, is that you don't always know what you're doing starting out. And that can lead you in some really interesting places. There's a kind of blessing quality to that. I'm not sure I would have written poems in the voice of my mother if I'd thought about it a lot. Instead, I really wanted to capture the way she told a story, which was partially making it sound so funny and fun to like kill a chicken or whatever, but then also saying, oh, there's no way I would ever want to do that again. So there was this kind of funny mix of nostalgia, regret, and also denial, which I think is partially human and partially, I mean, it's all human, but it's partially understandable. And it also led to reluctance in her telling some stories, you know. I think it's a way of dealing with that pain sometimes. But I also think it seemed particularly, I don't know how else to say, like African-American in its way. And so I really wanted to capture it once I realized that I was telling these stories that I hadn't seen necessarily, or this tone. Then I realized, well, I got to keep going with that. I got to write what I not necessarily know, but want to discover. And I think the key for me discovering in my first book was that poetry wasn't this airy thing that was out there in the atmosphere. I mean, I lived in Kansas for high school, and I was writing poems about oceans, you know. That didn't make sense, really. So I had to sort of cast your bucket down and really think about that poetry was the mud, you know, it was the dirt. It was the stuff around us. And I don't think that has changed for me. I think it's deepened and become historical and become more aware. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that can be difficult. I think I'll end with a poem that maybe answers that in a different way, if you don't mind. This isn't all the poem, don't worry. But it is in few. It's called Money Road, and it's a poem about the death of Emmett Till. As you likely know, Emmett Till was lynched in Mississippi. He was from Chicago. And, it's funny because I've been ending with this poem a couple times, and for some reason it really strikes me coming after that poem about my son and finding out about him. He's 9 now, and I think about having a son Emmett Till's age, was just a few years older, or, Trayvon Martin, or any child ripped from us. And it's from us all, really. So this poem is for a friend of mine named John T. Edge. I really want to thank you again for coming out, and I'll just end with this. It's called Money Road. One thing you will know is it starts in Greenwood, Mississippi, and then ends in Money, which is 10 miles away, and it starts to snow, which it mentions in the poem. Money Road. On the way to Money, Mississippi, we see little ghosts of snow, falling faint as words while we try to find Robert Johnson's muddy, maybe grave. Beside Little Zion, along the highway side, this stone keeps its offerings, bud and Louisiana hot sauce, the ground giving way beneath our feet. The blues always dance cheek to cheek with the church. Booker's Place back in Greenwood, still standing, its long green bar beautiful. Friendship Church just a holler away. Shotgun, shotgun, shotgun. Rows of colored houses as if the same can of bright stain might cover the sins of rotting wood. Now, mostly tar paper and graffiti holding McLaren Street together. R.I.P. Bucci. The undead walk these streets seeking something we take pictures of and soon flee. The hood of a car yawns open in awe. Men's heads peer in its lion's mouth, seeking their share. For sale, squash and snap beans. The midden of oyster shells behind Lusco's, the tiny O of a bullet hole in Booker's plate glass window. Even the Salvation Army thrift store closed, bars over every door. We're on our way again, away, along the Money Road, past grand houses and porte cocheres set back from the lane, over the bridge to find markers of what's no more there. Even the underpass bears a name. It's all too grave. The fake sharecropper homes of Tallahatchie Flats rented out along the road. Staged bottle trees chasing away nothing. The new outhouse whose crescent door foreign tourists pay extra for. Cotton planted in strict rows for show. A quiet snow globe of pain I want to shake while the flakes fall like ash. We race the train to reach the place Emmett Till last whistled or smiled or did nothing. Money more a crossroads than the crossroads be. Its gnarled tree. The Bryant store facing the tracks, now turned the color of earth, tumbling down slow as the snow, white and insistent as the woman who sent word of that uppity boy. Her men who yanked you out your uncle's home, into the yard, into oblivion, into this store abutting the Money Ginko, whose sign, worn away, now reads un or sin, I swear. Whose giant gin fans, like those lashed and anchored to your beaten body, still turn. Shot, dumped, dredged, your face not even a mask, a marred unspared, sightless stump. All your mother insists we must see to know what they did to my baby. The true Tallahatchie twisting south. The Delta, death's second cousin, once removed. You down for only the summer to leave the stifling city where later you will be waked, displayed, defiant, a dark glass. There are things that cannot be seen, but must be. Buried barely, this place no one can keep. Yet how to kill a ghost? The fog of our outdoor talk. We breathe, we grieve, we drink our tided drinks. I think now winter will out. The snow bless and kiss this cursed earth. Or is it cussed? I don't yet know. Let the cold keep still your bones. Thank you very much.